That's very interesting. Now that you mention direct nonviolent actions like that, I was wondering if you can tell us ways of struggling by people.
I've devoted quite a lot of my life to this as a matter of study as well as action, and but I find that being an activist and from an activist background and having met the people while they were doing things and knowing the risks they were taking, I have a slightly different perspective from some of the scholars who've written about it. Yesterday I was writing something about Chile in the 1980s, and the scholarship on the non-violent movement against Pinochet, which is obviously not the story that is told in the film No. You know, the film No about the plebiscite campaign makes out that there was this guy working in advertising who suddenly had the idea of what was the kind of campaign that would defeat Pinochet. Well, in Chile there were the group that we were working with was in War Resistance International, was called Servicio Paz y Justicia, SEPAC, and they were involved in different ways. They were the first people who ever talked in a really analytical way, that I ever heard talk in a really analytical way about how to overcome fear. I'd never heard people talk about this before. I'd heard people say, you know, with nonviolent action you have to overcome your fear, but I'd never heard people say, and there are ways to do this.
Yes, in the community too, and they were, I share that.
Yeah, and it wasn't only in Chile that this happened, I think, but in other places in Latin America there's a very good book by a friend of yours, Afirmación y resistencia, by Carlos Martin Beristain y Francis Vieira.
The title has been changing throughout time, right? Because it had a different title at the beginning.
No, it's Afirmación y resistencia, la comunidad como apoyo. So I think that's the one I've got anyway. And with SEPAC, they when I read what has been written in English, which of course is different from what's been written in Spanish, about the change in Chile, you read about these saucepan demonstrations, cacerolazos, the days of protest when everyone, which would be like a general strike, but maybe people wouldn't actually strike, but they would do something to recognise it was a day of protest. And but I, because of my link with SEPAC, know that SEPAC had a committee, initiated a creative committee that was attached to those days of protest, generating new ideas for what people could do so that they're not just milling around and eventually getting into trouble with the police or causing, or actually sparking off violence, but they're actually thinking creatively about what they can do. And another form of action, which again relates to the flash mobs of today, that they were very involved in, was a group called the Sebastián Acevedo Movimiento contra la Tortura, the movement against torture. And they used to do these lightning actions. They would go to a particular place, and they'd always have a big banner which said what they were doing, and it said, so here they torture. So they would they're going to a police headquarters where people torture, and they would unfold this. They would have a song that they always sang. The song that they nearly always sang was Yo te nombro libertad. I'm not going to sing it. And
you are not, or you are?
I am
you?
not going
no,
to say
oh,
it.
Shit.
I haven't learned it. No. And they would always have a little dialogue. The movement did have a priest who was leading it, and did draw very heavily on the Christians from the base communities. And so the dialogue was a bit like a catechism, but they always would have this, except that it's got secular words, obviously. And they would do this on the street, these different elements. They would always block the traffic, and they would always disperse within about 10 minutes, but leave 2 or 3 people there to get arrested. And the point of them getting arrested was then that meant that it entered the official record. They were arrested, they would be charged, it could be reported in newspapers. If anybody wanted to inquire about it, it was there in the police record. This had happened. A protest, and they organised. In the total, I think they ran from 1983 to 1987, and in that time, other groups in Chile took on the same model and did it in their places, and there were maybe, I think there were 80 something of this type of action that they would just plan, and then after the action, they would do a real evaluation. And I think this is one of the hugely important lessons about nonviolent action, is every action is an experiment. You're finding out about yourself, you're finding out the situation, you're finding out about the people who see the action, and so what the public response is, you're finding out about what the police and the regime response is, and so on. So every action is an experiment and needs this kind of evaluation afterwards. And I think because I'm an activist and not just a researcher, and because I knew the people and knew what they were doing, when it comes to me researching on nonviolent action, I can bring out more like dynamics like that. And so, for me.
Not just the description of a physical action, but the meaning,
the process of organising the meaning of it, where it fits into people's lives, how they prepared themselves personally, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, not just a list of actions.
And also
it's understanding more deeply why people commit and how they manage to do that.
And when the scholars on nonviolent action write about strategy, they are almost always writing, well, they're always writing after the event, which isn't, so it's never that could never be how it appeared to people at the time. I mean, almost every major non-violent change that has happened, or every movement, has taken people by surprise. As this is on Mujer Palabra, let me talk about Greenham. I was, the day when the Greenham peace camp started, I was in a non-violence training workshop, for a very advanced one. This was for the people who were planning to do non-violence training for the whole anti-nuclear movement, and the women for life on earth had arrived at Greenham, and they'd chained themselves to the gates, demanding an interview on BBC TV, and they had phoned up someone, Diana Shelley, who was at this training, asking for her advice, because she was a specialist in the legal support aspect of this. And she was saying, her first reaction was, "You're crazy. What are you, why are you asking me for your advice now that you've done it rather than before you did it? One thing, why are you chaining yourselves to the gate demanding that the BBC do something when nobody associated with the base can control what the BBC do?" The whole thing is just, it's just not thought out, you know. And we were all sitting there, oh my God, if only they, not we all. Some of us some people, actually I was not one of them, some people were sitting there saying, oh, if only these women had had a proper workshop beforehand, you know. Yes. And in fact, these women started what any reader of Mujer Palabra can see, and what people know very well from your own writings, was this fantastic, transformative movement that took everyone by surprise. And almost every significant non-violent movement has taken people by surprise. The Arab Spring, who predicted the Arab Spring? Nobody. Nobody, not regional specialists, not the people doing non-violence training with those groups, not the activists themselves. When regimes have fallen, I remember vividly in December 1989 listening to an interview with someone in Prague, and he just couldn't believe what was happening. He was at the centre of it all. He was the spokesperson for the Civic Forum in Prague, and he's saying, well, we just don't know what's going on. We don't know if the government's going to resign or what. We're not ready for this. And these things take you by surprise. And so anyone, when they start out in a movement, they're thinking about experimenting and inventing. They're not aware of the limits that they face. They suspect. Sometimes they might be very aware of the risks that they're running, but they don't know what they can achieve.
Of course.
But the people the people who study them afterwards somehow need to recapture the historical imagination to think themselves into what it's like for these people. And because of my involvement in WRI, I've been lucky enough to be with these people through the process, to be with people who are just sort of deeply depressed about what's possible in their situation. And then a year later, in 1989, I went to South Africa. One of the guys who really impressed me was this youth activist who had been on a hunger strike in prison. And because Margaret Thatcher went to visit South Africa, the English pro-apartheid Prime Minister, their hunger strike was timed to embarrass her. And so they were released after about 30-something days of hunger strike. And this guy, he really impressed me. He lived in a township. He was talking about his psychological troubles since his hunger strike and since his prison sentence, and in a very open way. I mean, incredibly mature for his age. But also, his home had been bombed, had been attacked. Part of it had been set fire to, and so on. At one moment, he came out quite casually with the kind of remarks that people in these heavy situations make. You know, he said, "Well, the day I got involved in the struggle against apartheid, I realised I could be signing my own death warrant." and you kind of thought, well, yeah, I mean, some people, they say these heavy things and you think, oh my God, you're being a bit melodramatic. But this guy, knowing what he'd been through, it meant an awful lot to me. And then 2 years later, 1991, in Belgium, I was on the War Resisters International had a conference. You were there, and he was there. Apartheid was dying.
Amazing, yeah.
And he had come out of South Africa, And this guy who I thought, my God, I wonder if I ever will see him again. And he was there and happy and able to start training himself professionally and think about what he might contribute to build a society. And so working in the office of War Resisters International was just an incredible privilege, not just for meeting the South Africans and, you know, these people in situations that everyone would talk about, but just meeting incredibly determined people who were going to put their life into something. I mean, there's a guy in Turkey called Osman who in 1995 declared himself a conscientious objector and refused to go to the military, and had over the next 2 or 3 years they repeatedly imprisoned him, and he had a very tough time. And eventually the state got tired of it, and he was a bit relieved that they stopped calling him up and imprisoning him. But since that time he has been in Spanish inhabilitado. He is not fit for public. He can't be given a job. He's outside the system. He's civil death.
Civil death, yes. Like so, here, they also they punished insumisos, not total resistors, with 15-year inhabilitation at one point. So, but then they stopped. Yeah. No?
So Ossi. In 1995 he began this. He's still liable for call-up because he hasn't passed the age. Yet he hasn't passed the maximum age to be called up. So if they want another fight with him, they can still have it. But also, he hasn't been able to get proper jobs. Friends give him work that they can pay him for in some way. And then one guy in Germany wrote round a set of people to say, look, Osman's about to become a parent, and you know, they really need a stable place to live. And so a bunch of us put in money so that Osman could actually buy a place, the flat where they still live. And this has carried on. We're talking today in 2013. He started this in 1995. And now he says he's on the edges of things, he's an interested observer, etc., etc. Mm-hmm. But he's living his life. But his whole life has been completely changed by that decision he took back in 1995.
And it's amazing also the solidarity in the movement. You don't always find it, but it happens more often than people think.
That's right. If you actually trust you trust the people who you. I must say, I've seen. Being the age I am, I've seen a lot of young people who've been extremely militant and committed, who have changed completely without becoming agents. I mean, also in 1995, I visited a conscientious objector in prison in Greece, and this year, again, he was called up. He was called up because he is politically active. He's against all the austerity measures that are being imposed in Greece, and so because of this, they wanted something to get him with, and he was called up again.
And he went, or is he in prison?
No. He's facing trial. He's facing trial, and it won't. It won't be me who goes to the court to speak for him, but it'll be someone else from WRI who goes to the court. So for me, like, having this continuous involvement internationally for 28 years now. Next year I finish as chair of War Resisters International, but I will carry on in some other, with some other involvement, obviously. But having this, you know, it's just amazing that you see people so many years afterwards who are living the consequences of decisions they made, but also have, you know, that the organisation is still there to give them support, even if the people have completely changed or weren't born. Yeah, the current staff, they all were born. There aren't many 18-year-olds in WRI, I'm afraid. Not yet.
So in some ways, our next question was, what do pacifists in WRI do? In some ways you have answered this, but you might want to add more things to it. What do people committed to nonviolent struggle do in the world to achieve what they see as a better world? I mean, you've been offering some examples, but would you like to add anything else?
There are just so many different things, and obviously a lot depends on your situation, where you are in your life. Some people just try to be a good person, you know, and quite
do the best they can.
Yeah.
Right.
And quite often I've visited people who I've become friends with who would no longer say, oh, I'm not an activist anymore, but they actually know what's going on in their community, and people know to go to them for certain things, and
for the analysis, for their analysis,
for suggestions and of what they might do, for ideas of who they might contact and so on, yeah. Or simply for a good somebody who'll listen to them well, because I think one of the key points for WRI as an international is that we really have to listen to each other, because we're people from different countries and different cultures, and there's an awful lot we don't understand about each other. And the basis of solidarity has to be really listening and hearing what the other person is saying, and not what we hope they're saying.
This new attitude has started in the 20th century, really, when we started, because the ways in which analysts approached reality were really patriarchal, you know, very. But since the 20th century, we started seeing things from the inside too, right? And that's really a good change.
What people do is quite often they do form groups, and actually, you know, if you're going to take nonviolent action, taking it together with other people is really important. So we have organised quite a lot of workshops around the place. I mean, the groups, the affiliates of WRI are quite often involved in what we call nonviolence training, which is not just preparation for nonviolent action, but it's also about thinking about how a group works well, making decisions about what kind of group you want, what kind of goals that you're going to concentrate on, and so on. And thank you for having this at hand.
Yes.
This is a manual that we've produced that's already been translated into, I think, 9 languages, and we've not even been asking for some. I mean, like someone from Nepal just wrote to us, I've seen it, can I translate it? And this has happened in Indonesia. I mean, languages that I don't even know what they're called. Eritrean, you know.
Wow. Yeah.
In situations where it's actually very difficult for people to work out what we can do, I mean, well, at least we can start a group and talk about what we can do. That's very important.
One of the things we say, I mean, in feminism too, and in pacifism, is that communication is like a tool for change, and that's why we give a lot of importance to language, but also to communication. The first step wherever also is communicating
Yeah.
In the past, for instance, people were dragged into action by leaders, but nowadays there's much more of this getting together and talk about it. Maybe you spontaneously jump into action, but then it's very healthy and very full of potential when you talk about it. For instance, in the Asambleas, because if you start learning to communicate, you start learning to analyze too, right? But if people don't talk about things together,
I think that the whole question of leadership is really difficult. Here, I was so delighted when Quince started in Spain to go to some of the early assemblies, and like these men of my age would come up to the microphone and start making these speeches, and people would somehow manage them, or maybe I should say manage us, you know, as a kind of demagoguery that people that goes with male politics for people men in their 60s and so on, and like these relatively new to it people in Quince, and especially a couple of younger women really impressed me with their ability to kind of say, well, actually, you know, we don't need to hear things that we all agree on already. We're trying to. Madrid, there was just one terror who had also got into email as well, and so was continuously wanting to speechify and so for me this was something really refreshing. I get completely depressed when I go to trade union rallies here, and it's the same platform always. I mean, or the same two guys are on it every time without exception, and you kind of think, oh my God. And then there was one big, I think it must have been a day of a general strike here I went on, and here come the anarchists towards the end of the rally. I think, oh, this is good. And then there was somebody on the CNT, I think it was on the CNT truck, and it was doing some kind of semi-musical call and response thing with the people following, and I thought, well, okay, it's not a speech, but it's I don't call this really a good example of anarchist participation. Some guy getting off doing all this and other people shouting back what they're meant to shout back. Not exactly creative. And then he handed the microphone over to some guy even older than me who proceeded to talk for I don't know how long. Obviously his main grievance was he wasn't up on the platform with the guys who are always up on the platform. And I just thought, you know, like some of these old forms, I mean, you expect better of this from anarchists, I do. But then a bit later were the people from Quince who were, I don't know, drumming, dancing. They were dressed up. They were much more playful in spirit and so on. And it was a completely different way, and like and absolutely non-hierarchical. I think there are big problems though, even with that, because with something like Quince, I mean, you look at the moment people start making documentaries about a movement, they're looking for spokespeople, and if you haven't chosen someone to speak for you, the media will choose someone to speak for you, and so it actually requires a lot of effort to think about how to structure your movement in a non-hierarchical way, so that the voice is shared. And
there has to be a change in the mentalities, because it's totally different to have a people's movement than to create groups. I mean, you cannot analyze the same kind of thing. You will never know what's really going to happen, because it has a degree of spontaneity that is, of course, political parties try to infiltrate it. I mean, to shape it and everything. But when people analyze 15M, I always find that they forget that it's not a group. It's a people's movement, and therefore we cannot apply the same kind of criterion when we speak about its strengths, its weaknesses, or it's full of groups. It's full of groups that have formed spontaneously, like groups going to evictions to prevent people's evictions. Or it's full of activists that are also coordinating or.
I think the movement, the organising against evictions has been perhaps its most spectacular achievement, and there it's really interesting, going back to the question of leadership, because it's clear that in the platform against evictions, there is a woman who knows everything there is to know about evictions, and she's quite often there, and yet she's not a household name. And she stands out because she writes excellent briefings that tell you what's what. If she appears in a TV interview, she just has everything at her fingers, and so she stands out because she has made herself the expert on evictions. But like every neighbourhood has one as well. I know in Aluce, I started talking with a friend who's got the same name as my daughter, Violetta, and I was just astonished. She about how much she knew, and of course she's unemployed. This is her passion, and she has briefed herself to know so much. So not everyone in a group will know this much, but people develop a capacity for a different type of leadership and confidence. And I think that I do see problems sometimes with in the education field, for example, because I live with someone who's extremely active in La Marea Verde, and we have. We're always selling the T-shirts and the scarves and everything.
I want one.
I didn't bring any.
Oh, I want to get one too, because I've only got a kind of coat.
And she finds herself, like the last strike day, our Neighbours Association had our Neighbours Association, when there are school strike days, offers any parent who can't look after their children that day, they can bring the children to the Neighbours Association instead of them going to school, and so on. And the TV has been very receptive to this.
Organised by the neighbourhood,
or by
the
Asociación de
educators?
Vecinos.
No.
They're in touch with
They're in touch, but
there's obviously teachers involved in the Neighbours Association and so on.
That's excellent.
So, and this has happened in various places in Madrid, and I suppose elsewhere, and the TV come along, and there are very few people who are actually willing to explain what it is that they're about and doing, and I think that this is a problem that people people are still not used to putting their point of view across